Mother-in-law constantly whispered to my husband to leave me. His sister lied that I was cheating, and they are trying to kick me out of the dream house. What did the husband do? I am beginning to feel the effects of my in-laws' poisonous connection with my spouse. You know, my husband was the favorite when we were kids. According to what Ethan has told me, his mother and he used to spend a lot of time together, as his dad was always so busy with business. On the other hand, my mother-in-law treats his sister Emily differently. My sister-in-law is unemployed, and she and her 3 children live with her deadbeat, gaming addict husband and 3 children. My husband eventually severed ties with his poisonous mother and sister when they had the gall to demand that we give up our dream home to them. Despite her obvious affection for both of her children, my mother-in-law clearly has a preference for my husband. I can only imagine how Emily felt about her own biological brother. When she was a kid, my husband has made it his mission to be a supportive elder brother to her. The problem is, my mother-in-law and Emily would both act in ways that were completely unacceptable at times. For instance, my in-laws, Emily included, and Ethan, who had just graduated from college, used to reside in the same home when we first began dating. My husband was granted a whole separate level by my in-laws so that he could have his own and invite anybody he wanted. For this reason, he would sometimes extend an invitation for me to stay the night at his apartment. But Emily would sneak into our room several times in the morning without knocking on the door as we slept. Of course, there were instances when we weren't even dressed appropriately, but she'd pretended it was totally normal and start chatting with Ethan about the most utterly irrelevant topics. I felt awkward about her seeing me in my underwear, so this was rather strange for me. It should have been assumed that Ethan would reside with his family at that time. As I well understand before anybody points out, is it really too much to expect to rap on the door before entering a room? I get that siblings may be close, but when Ethan and I were dating, we didn't know one another very well, so I thought it was rather rude. Consequently, I brought it up in our conversation with Ethan and informed him that I would not be visiting until he secured his door. Emily, who had earlier attempted to force her way into the office without success, became furious and began shrieking at us when he gave his approval. When we shut the door, Emily began to wonder why. In an effort to get her brother to allow her in, she began to knock on the door and jiggle it. After a long wait, Ethan let her in, and she barged into the room, demanding to know why he had put the lock there. As soon as she saw me, she began to accuse him of being upset with me by pointing at me. The level of rudeness and disdain she sounded like startled me. Although Emily was unconvinced, Ethan said that he was the one who wanted to put the door lock. They were siblings, she admonished him passionately, and they should keep no secrets from one another. She was really upsetting Ethan and me when we were sleeping, so he put the lock to prevent her from breaking in. Ethan assured her that he didn't have any secrets. Angry and accusing me of putting herself between Emily and her brother, Emily stormed over to confront me after hearing this. Being a pretty non-confrontational person, I felt this was all a little too much and went to the restroom. Even as Ethan attempted to calm her down, I could hear her yelling even louder. He came in to console me after she had gone. I could see he was sorry for her actions because he promised to have another conversation with her to make sure she apologized to me too. When I dropped over the next weekend, she apologized and offered the pitiful excuse that she had to have an emergency conversation with Ethan. Therefore, she reasoned that it must be okay for her to enter. She nodded submissively in response to Ethan's strong request that she not bother us again. This wasn't her only strange conduct toward Ethan. However, the problem was resolved. Whenever Ethan and I had a disagreement, even about little matters like movies, and Emily was there, she would begin advising him to find a partner with comparable interests. It would be Emily's opinion that we were obviously not a good match. Instead of giving Ethan a condemning glance, she would only smile. Another instance would be when she tried to pry into my life by asking me intrusive questions about my background. Even though Ethan and I had always been forthright about our histories, I still wasn't ready to tell his sister the truth. But she persisted in asking me awkward questions like, "Why did your ex break up with you?" No matter how I felt about the subject. "Were you inadequate in his eyes?" Alternately, "You may just state that you are not as attractive as my brother's ex-girlfriend." For as long as we were alone, she would ask me all these questions and make all these remarks. She seemed to be playing a game with me, and I began to believe that she was out to bring me down. At first, I didn't say a word. However, as time went on, I finally had enough. In response to her teasing, I told her that I preferred my ex-boyfriend S family to Ethan S, since my ex-father didn't have any intrusive relatives. Emily was taken aback by my response, which appeared to silence her for a short while. In essence, what I had informed her was correct. Despite Emily's strange connection to my husband, my mother-in-law was just as bad. My mother-in-law would completely disregard me when I initially entered his life. However, as soon as she caught wind of Ethan and I developing a serious relationship, she began acting as if I were attempting to kidnap her son. At family gatherings and dinners, she would make an effort to disregard me as if I didn't exist. On occasion, Ethan would see this and attempt to bring it up in conversation with her, but she would never budge. I went to a private school, and my mother-in-law used to think I was conceited and spoilt because of it. She taught in the public school system. She went so far as to advise Ethan to find a better wife than me, and I know she attempted to dissuade him from marrying me. My spouse, bless her heart, ignored her advice and proposed to me nevertheless. He proposed, and my mother-in-law and sister-in-law went into a panic. I should break up our connection and return the ring to Ethan, they told me over the phone, since he wouldn't listen to them, and maybe this was a wrong choice. They were crossing a line, and I told them so when I declined since it was so strange to me. My mother-in-law's position on the matter shifted when she saw they couldn't win me over. She reluctantly advised me to be the greatest wife he could ask for, just as she had done for him during the years. I attempted not to take offense to her remarks, even though I was little insulted. But Emily told me I was obviously a money digger, and that her brother should have someone far more deserving of his position. In an effort to dissuade Ethan from marrying me, she threatened to expose me before we were married. I told Ethan everything that happened after this chat, and he was shocked by how disrespectful they were to me. This was the source of his argument with my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, who continued to believe that he didn't think I was good enough for him. He reassured me that his love for me was unwavering, thus I should disregard their opinions. Despite his reassuring remarks, I couldn't help but feel terrible that his own family rejected me. My mother-in-law offered to cover half of our wedding costs, but Ethan and I politely rejected since we had previously planned to pay for our own. We informed her of the lengths to which we had gone to save up for this special event. Rather than being glad for us, this just served to heighten her anger, and she began to express her sadness to Ethan about his apparent independence from her. It felt like Ethan's dad was very pleased with us. Unlike his mom and sister, his dad was quite level-headed and never minded that we were together. My mother-in-law persisted in nitpicking with Ethan, so we reached a compromise by suggesting that she plan the rehearsal dinner instead. The gesture was appreciated, and she agreed. Things, however, took a surprising turn as the wedding drew near. Emily told Ethan she missed him and asked herself to eat with us as the first occurrence. Since Ethan and I had just gotten engaged and were living independently, we assumed her desire to see her brother was sincere, and so we came to an agreement. I reluctantly agreed to have dinner with her when Ethan asked me directly if it was all right with me. I didn't want to be impolite to my sister-in-law, who would soon be my family. Emily suddenly began ranting about how much she hated infidelity in relationships, as we were enjoying a delicious supper. According to her, cheaters are worthless waste of space. Emily stared me down and said, "What was it like to be a worthless piece of trash?" We were staring at her with curiosity, trying to figure out where she was taking this. Emily started shouting and accused me of having an affair with my coworker Liam. My brows wrinkled in bewilderment as she spoke. After Ethan questioned her about it, Emily proudly started displaying photos of myself with a coworker, claiming she had caught me in the act. Since we began dating, I had never been disloyal to Ethan, so I was perplexed as to why she suspected me of being unfaithful to my coworker. By the looks of the photos, they were completely innocuous. True, Liam and I were very close coworkers, but our friendship sprang only from the fact that we both began working for the firm at the same time, and, in an effort to avoid further reprimands from our boss, we would help each other out any time we made a mistake. Ethan was even aware that Liam was seeing someone. The fact that I have never been coy with Ethan about any of my coworkers and that my phone is unlocked speaks volumes. My sister-in-law twisted these innocent photographs into proof of an imagined affair, even though they clearly did not occur. I was really annoyed by her efforts to damage my reputation and our connection with Ethan, even though her claims were completely without merit. Ethan, who seemed startled and distressed, intervened on my behalf before I could explain myself. He confronted Emily, demanding to know why she had been secretly photographing me and my coworkers in public locations without our knowledge or permission. As soon as Emily heard this, she began to explain that her intentions were just to study me. She said I wasn't from their social class and was terrified I was marrying him for his wealth. Emily was informed by Ethan in no uncertain terms that her accusations were unfounded and that she was making a big deal out of nothing. Emily continued shrieking at him, demanding that he see through her apparent affair, while he attempted to reason with her, begging her to stop spreading falsehoods and attempting to damage our relationship. She was quite adamant about her claims, even after I attempted to reassure her that we were only co-workers. As her charges became more serious, the mood became more tense. I informed Emily that I was going to report her to the police for unlawfully taking images of me and stalking me since I had had enough of her allegations and screaming. Looking at me, her face became pale as she demanded to know if I was serious. I made it very apparent that I had all the proof that she had been attempting to smear my reputation by following me about the office, taking pictures of me and my coworkers without my knowledge or permission, and spreading baseless accusations. Emily began to beg, looking at Ethan and then at me, that she was just doing this to keep her brother safe. In her opinion, it was insignificant. After she had done everything for Ethan, she began pleading with him to speak to me because a lawsuit would ruin her career and future. I told Emily it was up to her to preserve herself now. I assured Emily that I would not sue her so long as she kept out of my life when she asked me what I wanted. Nothing Emily could do now would allow her to get out of this jam. She turned to her brother for comfort, but Ethan stood by me and reassured her that she should be thankful that I was ready to go on. We haven't had any communication since that day. She has never had the courage to speak to me again, but Ethan's friendship with her persists. The second thing that happened immediately before our wedding was the night before. Despite our offers to assist her in any way before the event, my mother-in-law refused to do so at our rehearsal dinner, insisting instead that she would handle the planning alone. It became clear, however, that the preparations had not been up to scratch when we arrived. Cold Italian cuisine served on camp tables covered in plastic ended up being the rehearsal dinner. It threw off the whole celebration since she continued acting sad over supper. Even though she had nothing to do with the wedding's budget or preparation, she became intoxicated and began acting inappropriately with the other guests, expressing her frustration at how stressful it had been. My father-in-law became enraged with her eventually and escorted her out as well. Emily attempted to argue in defense of her mother's actions, but my father-in-law would have none of it. It went horribly wrong, as you would expect, and I began to worry that the two ladies might ruin my wedding the next day too. Ethan and I had our first argument that evening. I warned him forcefully that, given their behavior, Emily and my mother-in-law would undoubtedly try to steal the show from us during the wedding, so he should cut off their invitations. In his steadfast refusal, my husband attempted to reassure me that my father-in-law would be there and would ensure that they would not be allowed to escape punishment. I had to tell Ethan that the wedding the next day would not go forward unless he excluded his sister and mother. Though I was aware of how I sounded, the thought of these women's potential intentions made me worried, and Ethan's expression of disbelief was priceless. I hoped that my wedding day wouldn't be another occasion when I humiliated myself in front of my loved ones. I was hoping that by issuing this ultimatum, Ethan would see how much his lack of boundaries was beginning to impact our relationship, even though it was obvious that he didn't have any. Fortunately, Ethan got it and picked the correct option. He informed his father over the phone that his sister and mother had been unwelcome first thing in the morning. He was reassured by my father-in-law that my mother-in-law and Emily would not come there unannounced, and he didn't even seem astonished. Following our brief discussion with my father-in-law, my mother-in-law, and Emily began contacting Ethan non-stop in an apparent attempt to persuade him to allow their presence at his wedding. However, Ethan made it clear to them that he did not feel comfortable with their behavior at the wedding due to their treatment of me during our relationship. As soon as she heard this, my mother-in-law began berating him for being a terrible woman for interfering with his relationship with his mother. Ethan was unmoved by Emily's attempts to reason with him. Even though my father-in-law was unable to attend our wedding due to his family obligations, I must admit that I felt terrible about my ultimatum. When I found out via Ethan's relatives that my mother-in-law and Emily had intended to wear white gowns to our wedding, whatever remorse I had felt about it quickly faded. According to what they told me, Emily had instigated the practice of wearing white among the female members of a family WhatsApp group. She was making the point that the bride shouldn't be the only one to wear white. They could stoop so low to inflict my pain, I couldn't believe it. It made me happy to hear that they were not invited after this. Even though he missed his loved ones, Ethan could see my point of view. No one attempted to steal the show from us, and the wedding was perfect in every way. Since that day, however, my mother-in-law and Emily have cut off any communication with me, which is something I am very happy about and am totally at ease with. I didn't mind too much that they only invited my spouse home for supper or special occasions. Conversely, my father-in-law treated me with kindness, and we maintained contact over the years. We saved up our money carefully, and Ethan and I were able to buy a home in the end. This massive house is our first, and we couldn't have been more thrilled to possess something of our own. While his parents and Emily did stop over for a little housewarming party, I went to see my parents and spend time with my family that day to get away from them. Finally, we reached the meat of the matter. Unexpectedly, my mother-in-law contacted me a few weeks ago. Since we haven't spoken since the day I married Ethan, this came as a complete shock to me. Unexpectedly, she inquired about my well-being and living circumstances in a casual manner. I answered her inquiries while feeling a little taken aback by her unexpected curiosity. After that, she inquired as to how it was like to live in such a large home, with only Ethan and myself. I was unable to conceive despite my best efforts, and her remarks hurt, since Ethan and I had wanted to have a family for a long time. Although we had come to terms with the possibility that we would never be able to have children of our own, Ethan was aware of this. Upon initially learning of the news, I informed Ethan many times that he could divorce me at any point and marry someone else, giving him the opportunity to have a family of his own. However, Ethan had never abandoned me. As long as we had each other, he assured me, it was okay to remain childless since he loved me. My mother-in-law made a subtle statement about how everyone in our families knew about this. After that, she told me that Emily was expecting a baby. This would have been her third kid, so I was surprised to hear this. From what I gathered from Ethan, these unintended pregnancies occurred because her spouse was unemployed and didn't think it was necessary to use a condom. Emily's boyfriend exemplified sloth and did nothing to assist with household chores or the children. From what I have heard, Ethan considers Emily to be his personal maid. In fact, he pays none of the household expenditures at all. While he spends all day gaming, Emily works various part-time jobs. Emily continues to be with him despite everyone's advice to end the relationship. According to my mother-in-law, Emily was unable to continue working throughout her pregnancy due to financial constraints. Our home was too large for a childless couple like Ethan and me, so she suggested that we sell it. Her request caught me off guard, and I found it difficult to formulate my response. After I inquired if she was kidding, my mother-in-law continued by saying that Emily and her husband were right and that they should have a larger home. She had requested that they relocate with us since she did not have enough room for them at her own place. With all the emotions swirling around me, I struggled to prepare her reaction while the weight of this statement lingered in the air. I told her that we were still making payments on this home as it was ours. It seemed ludicrous and invasive to think that someone else would move in with us so suddenly without consulting us beforehand. But my in-laws stressed that she had previously discussed this with Ethan, and he had given his approval, so it must be true. I found this strange, since Ethan and I were quite open with each other. I had no doubt that he would have informed me if his sister and her family had come to reside with us. Since Ethan and I were joint owners of the home, I made it clear to my mother-in-law that he needed my approval before he could provide it. Unless we both gave our consent, no one could reside here with us. As a middle ground, I informed her that I would gladly let Emily and her husband stay with me for a few days, if that was their desire, but I would not let them to permanently reside with me. In contrast, my mother-in-law began yelling at me, demanding that I make room for my sister-in-law and her husband since it is my duty as their daughter-in-law. She promised that if I complied, our differences would be forgotten. To calm myself, I told her, "Sure, I will be happy to let them have our place." This angered me, but you see, we are still paying for this place, and I know that if Emily and her husband move in, they want to be helping us with the mortgage or the bills. Hence, I think you should take some responsibility and help pay for Emily, her husband, and her children to live in our house. I will be happy if you can pay just the mortgage for us, and we can cover the bills for everyone. I know that you want to be able to pay the mortgage with just the one job you have, so tell me, when are you getting a second job to pay off the debt? My mother-in-law, when she heard this, burst into fury. She thought it was absurd that I was asking her to cover our mortgage, so I shot back that she should be just as surprised that we wouldn't allow Emily's family come in and take care of them. Even more enraged, she persisted in her yelling, while I grinned contentedly. My refusal to comply with her requests caused her to end our call. Almost immediately after that, my sister-in-law yelled at me over the phone for having the gall to ask her mother to cover our mortgage. She went on to add that she had always suspected that I was just interested in money. But I countered that it was her attempt to live with us that made her a gold digger. When she asked me who the true gold digger was in the family, I pointed out that her own boyfriend had been very unhelpful. It seems that this silenced her. No amount of bickering from her would ever get her family into our property unless they offered to help us pay off our mortgage, I informed her firmly. I put my family last and put money first, she said, accusing me of being cold-hearted. I was relieved at the thought of finally taking charge of my life at home, now that the tables were turned, and I would have to stand up for myself instead of cowering. But when I consider my spouse, I can't help but feel a twinge of shame, and I find myself on Reddit, questioning if my actions have made me a terrible person. All of you who have cheered me on are much appreciated. Why would my mother-in-law ever ask us to do something so absurd? That is the most pressing issue everyone continues asking. This haughtiness on the part of my mother-in-law has always been the reason. My spouse has to have an honest conversation with me about how long he has allowed this act to continue. It breaks my heart that my mother-in-law would lie about her own son if it means she can obtain what she wants. Due to my mother-in-law's long-standing bias against my husband, my sister-in-law is only a pawn in her game, willingly complying with her every whim. For the sake of gaining my mother-in-law's favor, Emily does nothing except listen to her mother. While Emily's useless husband would do nothing to support the family, she could rely on us to pay the bills and look after the kids. So that we may have a conversation, I am patiently waiting for my husband to return from his business trip. This is too crucial for me to talk to him about over the phone. My last update was 7 days ago. I was still waiting for my husband to return, as I said before. Upon his return, and our subsequent opportunity to converse, I informed him about his mother's phone call, requesting that we relinquish our property to his sister and her family. After Ethan seemed surprised by what I said, I proceeded to give him the whole tale. His mother had informed him that his sister was pregnant before he left on the vacation, but other than that, he was completely unaware of anything. He was unaware that she would make such unreasonable demands. That was his only knowledge of the issue. Since I am not capable of dealing with his family, I informed him strongly that I expected him to speak to my mother-in-law about this and manage the problem. He consented. In front of me, he confronted my mother-in-law, demanding to know why she had deceived me about him. When my mother-in-law realized she had lied to me, she attempted to explain that she had known he would be okay with his sister living with us, so she had opted to ask me directly. When I caught her red-handed, she resorted to her old tricks. She was stopped in her tracks by Ethan, who demanded to know why she had thought he would be okay with Emily and her family moving in. He would have preferred to assist Emily out by letting her family move in, because my mother-in-law informed him that he and Emily were close. Hearing this made me furious, but I restrained myself from speaking out so that Ethan could deal with his mother. After that, my husband made it clear that he would not be willing to house Emily, her husband, and their 3 children, and that she could not compel us to do so. My mother-in-law began shouting that Emily really needed someone, but my husband calmly explained that it wasn't our duty and that she could take care of Emily herself if she so desired. My mother-in-law went on to explain that my father-in-law was against the idea and that their house was too cramped, but that we were able to readily lend Emily a hand because of our enormous home. She went on to add that I could assist out Emily's kids and feel pleased since I didn't have any kids of my own anyhow. I saw my husband's face change color for the first time, and my eyes widened in horror. He responded angrily, telling her that she couldn't use her callous comment about me as an excuse to make me look after Emily's kids. My father-in-law was justified in his distaste for Emily, he told her further, since she had turned into a machine for producing children. He was done with her and with them. Ethan kept shouting at my mother-in-law, telling her that he had attempted to maintain a cordial relationship with them, despite their persistent disdain for me, but that he could no longer tolerate it. Ethan calmly reminded my mother-in-law that our home belonged to us, that I was his wife, and that anybody who treated me disrespectfully belonged nowhere in his life, even if she had begun pleading with him. Ever since that incident, Ethan has avoided communicating with my mother-in-law and Emily. My father-in-law did try to get in touch with him, but after he found out what had happened, he could see why Ethan had made such a bold move. Even when my father-in-law spoke and apologized to me on his wife's behalf, I informed him that he wasn't to blame nonetheless. Many individuals have advised me to set up surveillance cameras around my home in case my in-laws and Emily decide to cause trouble. Consequently, I placed an internet purchase for them and had them strung around my home. It just so happened that last weekend, when I was home alone, they chose to come up and knock on my door. Upon seeing their presence on my camera, I promptly contacted Ethan, who informed me that he was his route. My in-laws and Emily were standing there, enraged, as I answered the door. They insisted I let them in, but I refused and told them they could approach me outside the house if they wanted to discuss anything. My mother-in-law began to accuse me of being selfish and greedy and how cruel I was. They had no business barging in here uninvited. I gently informed her it was our house. Ignoring the cameras that were recording her every move, my mother-in-law went on with her rant. I gently brought up our past discussion, restating that I would not be leaving my house to accommodate Emily and her husband, and I told her to hold off on talking until Ethan got home. Emily became angry and began to accuse me of being too obstinate and of causing unnecessary family strife. As she had suspected all along, she accused me of being a money digger and of attempting to steal her brother from his family, so that they wouldn't dare come within 50 feet of our home again. I told them that our cameras were recording their every word and that I planned to utilize the footage to acquire a restraining order. Their mouths dropped open in disbelief as my mother-in-law raised her voice to warn me against my audacity. In a mocking tone, I warned her that a court order would be on its way unless they immediately left our land. This startled them to their core, and Emily immediately began to reassure me that I was being dramatic and that it was all in my head. Ethan finally showed up at this point, which was a relief. He approached us in a composed manner and inquired of my mother-in-law as to their purpose for being there. She went to give him an embrace, but he stopped her and demanded to know with renewed vehemence why she and Emily were in this place. Emily began to explain that they had come to face me because they knew I was attempting to control his life by preventing him from talking to Emily. Because they were so ridiculous, I couldn't help but roll my eyes. After explaining to them both that he had chosen to go no contact, Ethan made it clear that he wanted nothing to do with any of them. At this point, my mother-in-law began pleading with him to forgive her, but he only demanded that they vacate the premises or face the prospect of contacting the authorities. Their mouths dropped open in disbelief. It was obvious that none of them had anticipated his response. Ethan continued by threatening to contact the police and have them removed from our property if they returned to our home. Ethan no longer cared about their distraught expressions. It was a relief to know that my spouse was finally advocating on my behalf. Both of them eventually stormed out, their anger evident. After that, Ethan had a conversation with my father-in-law, who was just as surprised as we were that my mother-in-law and Emily had sneaked up on us without telling him. He gave us his word that we had been correct in refusing to allow them in. Their actions are also starting to irritate him more and more. After Ethan kicked them out, I had no doubt that they will never again dare to step foot on our land. If they do, I will promptly notify them and get legal counsel. Thankfully, my husband has come to terms with the fact that his family is poisonous now. Maybe they will stop causing us problems, and we can go on with our lives. Since I do want to put this behind me, I am hoping this is my final update.